Good morning, UP scientists. Today we're going to be getting into our second to last class for the year. So it's time to start putting everything that we've learned in this unit, to ecosystem restoration unit, together in our final end of unit assessment. So let's get right into that for today. So the first thing we're going to do is, since we've gone through this unit kind of quickly and used some resources like Newsela articles to learn some of the concepts, I'm just going to bring everything back together and make sure that everybody understands all the key concepts and vocabulary that we were supposed to pick up along the way here. So today we're going to be writing our first draft of our final argument, our final writing about this unit. Tomorrow, you're going to improve on your first draft based on feedback, and that's going to be your final assessment for this unit. So before we start, we're going to review some of those key vocabulary and concepts that we should have picked up along the way. Remember, our chapter 3 question was, why aren't Cecropia trees growing and thriving in the soil? And to figure out how the soil in the project area might be affecting the Cecropia trees, we did a lot of work to understand how soil can be different. So the first definition we had that you should have already written down, so I'm not going to make you do it again, but if you don't have this in your paper notes, pause the video and get it down now. So a decomposer was an organism that breaks down droppings or dead organisms. And some examples of decomposers we had were fungi, bacteria, earthworms, millipedes. And when they broke down the waste matter of other organisms, they released their own waste matter and added that matter to the soil. Soil was a mixture of rocks, water, air, parts of dead organisms, and tiny living organisms, including those bacteria, earthworms, and all that kind of stuff. So again, if you don't have this in your notes, go ahead and get it there now. And we'll move on to the next one. So this was our first key concept for the unit, and I'm going to have you write this down in the Edpuzzle for today, as well as in your paper notes if you don't have it already, because these are going to be very important for writing your final argument. So our first key concept was the decomposers release nutrients from dead plants and animals into the soil. The next couple things we learned was kind of updates to old ones. So we learned that earlier we learned that plants and animals grow by changing food molecules into body molecules that can build their bodies. And it turns out decomposers do the same thing. So we can now say that animals, plants, and decomposers grow by changing food molecules into body molecules that can build their body. Similarly, we are updating this key concept. So it's going to say plants, animals, and decomposers use food molecules to release energy for movement and growth. So remember that matter is made out of molecules. So they take in matter, they take in these food molecules, and they use some of those to release energy so that they can grow and move. The last couple lessons, we talked about how those decomposers release nutrients into the soil and how plants need those nutrients to grow. So what a nutrient is something that's taken in by plants and animals that's going to help them grow. And based on that, a key concept that we should have picked up from Tuesday's Newsela articles is that plants need nutrients to help make food molecules for energy and for body matter. So once you've gotten all those written down, we're going to go ahead and start our writing of our final arguments. And this is going to be our first draft that we're doing today. And I'll give you some feedback and we'll write the final draft tomorrow. So we're going to be writing an argument about the snakes in the forest ecosystem, just like we did at the beginning of the unit in our pre-assessment. So there are a few pages in this writing task. Remember this is the same argument we wrote at the very beginning of the unit, but this time when you write, you can draw upon all the things we've been learning about ecosystems. So first, let's just take a look at it and review all the directions and prompts to make sure everybody understands what to do. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Google Doc that you all have access to for today's lesson. And this is the top of it. So this is our end of unit writing, arguing why a forest ecosystem is not thriving. So the directions for the whole task are, first, we're going to read the scenario below. Then we're going to read the scenario below. Then we're going to complete the diagram in the drawing, in the Google drawing that's attached to today's lesson to complete part 1. Third, we're going to read the information for part 2. And then finally, we're going to write our argument based on, to answer the question on the last page. And we're going to use the sentence starters there to help organize our argument if we need to. So our scenario is right here. So mice, snakes, grass, and mushrooms live in an area of a forest. The mushrooms are decomposers. A forest ranger has gathered data showing that snakes are not growing and thriving in the forest. So here are our organisms. We have mice, we have snakes, we have grass, and we have mushrooms. So obviously there are more organisms in the ecosystem than this, but we're just using a simplified version of it to do our explanations today. So part 1 is this. So the forest ranger has filled in some information in this diagram about the ecosystem in the forest. Finish the diagram by adding symbols and labels to show what the grass, mice, snakes, and mushrooms need to grow. Include what you know about molecules and energy. So a copy of this image has been placed in a separate Google drawing file in today's assignment for us to complete. So here is that Google drawing. And the way we're going to do this is, let me get this out of the way. There we go. So this is your Google drawing. You can see that there it's partially filled in. And this out of the way. So you have nutrients and water in the soil. You have carbon dioxide in the air. You have your 4 organisms here. You have a sun. And it's up to you to fill in the rest of this diagram to explain how energy is moving through the ecosystem. So the way you can do this, you can come up here to pick different types of arrows and lines. So if you think that maybe there should be an arrow pointing from the sun to the snake, you can do that. If you want to make it a little bit wider, you can go to lion weight, this one right here, and make it thicker. You can add other things to it. If you just want to draw something like a circle, you can go to the scribble up here. You can make it a different color if you want. And if you think this is very important down here, that we have some water, you can circle it. You might want to change it away from an arrow to a normal line. There we go. You can also add shapes like fancy arrows or little notes here. And probably the most important one besides the arrows that you want to add in is this one right here, the text box, because this is where you're going to explain what's going on. So if you think that the mice eat the snakes, and that's what this arrow means, you might put a box here and say mice get food matter from the snakes. Now, it's obviously not correct, but you could do something like that to explain what each of your arrows means. So you should be adding, based on what we know in this unit, you should be adding a lot to this diagram. So there should be a whole bunch of things that you can add, should be a bunch of new arrows, and a bunch of text explaining what all those arrows mean. So I'm going to clear this out so that way you guys have a nice blank page to work with. All right, and then let's get back to the end of unit writing assessment. So that was part 1, completing that diagram. Part 2 is right here. So in part 2, the forest ranger is getting ready to present information to an ecosystem restoration group about why the snakes are not growing and thriving. We're going to use the data in the table below and your completed diagram from part 1 to write an argument about why the snakes are not growing and thriving in the forest. You want to be sure to explain what you know about ecosystems, matter molecules, and energy. The audience for your argument is the ecosystem restoration group. So you should support, your argument should be at least 10 sentences long and use multiple pieces of evidence from the unit to support your claim. So here we have the table. It shows us the number of different organisms, as well as the number of sunny and rainy days, and the amount of carbon dioxide in the air, both this year and last year. So 10 sentences might seem like a lot, but we have these sentence starters to help you out here. So this is a good way to structure your argument, so you can definitely use these. If you don't want to use these and feel like you can explain it better on your own, feel free to delete them, but make sure that you're still giving a complete argument that includes kind of all these things. So our question is, why aren't the snakes growing and thriving in the ecosystem? So our argument is going to start right here. So the first part of it should be something like, the snakes are not growing and thriving because, and then you need an explanation here. Then you're going to have, for each piece of evidence you're presenting, you're going to say, so the evidence shows that something's going on, and then this matters because why does it matter? And based on that evidence, what do you know? What inference can you make? What does it mean for the ecosystem? I'm going to do that for 3 different pieces of evidence at least. And then let's come back to this. So we're going to turn this off. Clear. Close. Okay. So when you're writing your argument, you want to be sure you're following these guidelines. So most of these are from our scientific explanation guidelines. So it's going to be answering a question with a claim about the natural world. It's going to include evidence to support the claim. So evidence can be data from the project area. It can be ideas that we got from investigations. It can be ideas from books. It can be ideas from Newsela articles that we read. This argument is going to connect the evidence to the claim by linking different pieces of evidence together to show how they support the claim. So that's what all those sentences for each piece of evidence, that's their goal. So you're linking different pieces of evidence together to show that that piece of evidence supports the claim. It's written for an audience. So our audience here is going to be the ecosystem restoration group. It's going to be using scientific language, so all that vocabulary we've been using throughout the whole unit. And it's going to end with a conclusion. So after all those sentences about different pieces of evidence, you're going to end up writing a conclusion. So arguments, just like most types of writing, end with a conclusion that wraps up the whole piece. So often in a scientific argument, the conclusion is just going to restate the claim in some way. So you're going to make your initial claim about why the snakes aren't growing and thriving, and then at the end, you're going to kind of restate that claim to sum up all your thoughts and all your evidence and put it in a nice, neat package. So these are your guidelines for writing a scientific argument. And you can always refer back to this page to make sure that you've done all of these things at the end of the lesson. Remember, you should base your arguments on evidence. And in this case, the data you have is the information about the snakes in the forest ecosystem. So make sure you link that data with scientific ideas that you now know about ecosystems. So make sure you're taking those numbers from the table in your assignment for today. So this table right here, make sure you're taking these numbers and explaining them and attaching them to knowledge that you've gained throughout the unit about how ecosystems work. And yeah, so that's about it. So go ahead and complete your diagrams and then write your argument, your first draft for today. And make sure you're doing this independently. Make sure it's your own ideas. And I'll take a look at these as much as I can tonight and tomorrow morning. You can give you some feedback. And tomorrow, you're going to be improving your draft based on that feedback as the final assessment for this unit. So think of this kind of as a end of unit test, but it's kind of more of an essay format. Make sure that your notes are organized and ready to use for tomorrow. Those paper notes that you've been taking all unit long, make sure you have them handy, make sure they're organized. If they're not, go back and look into the past Edpuzzle videos and try and pull out all those vocabulary words and key concepts that we had, so you have them all right in front of you to use for your arguments. So that's going to be it for today. So get this first draft done as well as you can, so that tomorrow you can get a really great score on that end of unit assessment. So see everybody tomorrow. Bye.